Emacs gets kicked around for being the antithesis of the Unix model because it's this giant monolithic application. But in fact, it's kind of the perfect glue for gluing various Unix command line utilities together. And I want to show you an example of that. So I want to take a look at a directory listing in Emacs, and Emacs built-in directory listing facility is built directly on good old ls. So I'm going to select the directory I want to look at. And this listing should look pretty familiar because it's just an ls listing which has then been put into an editor buffer. Well, how is it useful, more useful to have that in an editor buffer than it is to have it on the command line? Well, one way that's more useful is I can switch it into editable mode. I'm going to hit Control-X, Control-Q. And I'm going to go over here. And I'm going to rename this file. I'm going to rename it just by editing the buffer. Now that's saved, and the file has been renamed. So I can use any of my regular editor commands to update the names of files here. But as it happens, I want to edit more than just the files in this directory. I really want to do a deep rename of a whole bunch of files in different directories. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the top level of this app, and I'm going to use something called find dired, which is basically a combination of the dired mode, which you just saw, and find, which is just good old Unix find. So it's going to ask me what directory to start in, and then it's going to ask me for arguments to the find command, which it's just standard find arguments. So I'm going to say -name, and I'm going to look for anything with the name that contains presenter. Now we've got a listing which looks pretty similar to what we saw before, except instead of being just a single directory listing from ls, this is a listing that's produced by the find command. And you can actually see the find command that it used up here, and it includes the -ls on the end, which makes it output similar to ls. Now I'm going to switch this buffer into editable mode, and then I'm going to do a find and replace in the buffer. And I'm going to go through and interactively choose the things that I want to replace. And I'm going to save it. And just going to check real quick. Let's see. If I go into one of those directories that I was looking at before, yeah, it looks like I've got all those renames were in fact saved. So what I just did is I used my editor to do a standard file buffer find and replace to do a deep rename across a whole tree of files. And this is I think a great example of emergent functionality. I could have, there's probably some tool I could have used that's written especially for doing that kind of deep renaming, or I'm sure I could have written a script to do it. But I didn't have to do either of those. I didn't have to figure out what tool it was. I didn't have to write a script because I know how to do find dired, and I know how to search and replace text in a buffer. And just knowing those two things, I could put them together and do a deep file rename.